Welcome back to the Stepping In podcast. This is a special series where we're going to be looking back on the important stuff, the people in your workforce. Over the next couple episodes, we will revisit how systems undercut workforce. It never ceases to amaze me how frequently workforce issues are really leadership or lack of planning issues. Sit back and let's reflect on what we have learned to design a better system to promote and maximize efficiency. So let's bring the best to the front and let's focus on the people that we have, not the people we wished we had.
Look at this. 99. What does 99 mean, Renee?
Well, back in my day, there was 99 bottles of beer on the wall, but I bet that's not what you're talking about.
That could be our whole episode. Let's just sing 99 bottles of beer on the wall and see if anyone listens to it.
That would be terrible. Recording a straight up episode on singing art and us singing. I mean, professional people might pull it
We
off,
could do
but
it.
you and I singing that, it would be not good.
I don't know.
No, it really
Here we are,
is
99th
99th
episode.
Pretty excited. We got a special one planned here for the 100th coming up. But today we've got a really good one for you. So, what are we going to be talking about? Today, we're going to talk about summer self-care and kind of managing the tough stuff. There's some good things that happen in summer, and there's some hard things that happens in summer. Plus, it's really hot, which for me does not make me feel better about anything in life. I'm closer to being irritated, lack of patience, just a lot more challenging for me when I'm hot. And so we're going to kind of talk through what does that look like and then talk about some self-care. And now don't turn off if some of you are anti-self-care because some of you are like, let me talk about why it's important and why we all need to think about it. And it may not be the right words for you, but the concepts are going to be good. So you're not going to want to miss this one. But before we get started into all this, so what in the world is going on at the farm in the middle of July?
Well, there's nothing really you can do in the fields. Co-op's coming and spraying for us. But, I started looking at the satellite images of my farm, and you know how the grass kind of creeps into the driveway sometimes on the edges, in the
Yeah.
crushed rock. It looks bad when they take the satellite photos. And so, I'm trying to make sure I maintain and spray the edges of the driveway a little bit more because I'd like to see better pictures. It looks like a mess when I go to Google Maps or Apple Maps and look at the satellite view, Renee. And, as a farmer, we're all about mowing. I don't live on my farm, but we still mow, and make it look nice, keep the landlord happy. But, these are the things I think about. And so, when you're a farmer, you think about these things and you want to make sure aesthetically you want to present an image. So I'm, pulled out some chemical and spraying the grass in the driveway.
Yeah. So technically, then all you're telling me is technology has made it worse because you didn't used to get satellite images and you didn't get used to get those pictures. So you only saw it from a couple other side views. It would
We got
probably be
satellite
easier.
images, but the detail is so much clearer now. So you can see everything in a
Oh,
way that you couldn't see everything before. So now, you've got to do all these things.
I hear you, but I think that just makes oh man, once again, grateful to be a city girl. Don't have to do that. And the HOA has to do all the mowing, which this is
Yeah.
hilarious, but they switched a chemical up to try to get rid of dandelions. And that same guy had done it for 40 years, but he didn't read the details and it was a different chemical. And we have like brown polka dots across across the whole
Yeah, that's not
neighborhood.
good.
Neighbors are very unhappy about brown polka dots. And the irrigation ban that came along with that in June wasn't able to
Right.
fix brown polka dots. So the neighbors, it kind of looks pretty funny. And I must not have had very many dandelions because my part of the neighborhood looks fine, but other parts are wow. So anyway, it was a chemical mishap, which I'm sure never happens on your farm.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Of course not. So today we're going to talk about like some of the things that are kind of stressing people out this summer, and then going to give you some real practical tips on and some data on how to think about this because summertime is not always just as easy as some people make it out to be. For families, you think about families may continue work in the summer, school's out, but families don't have that time off. So there's more kids around, either trying to get them to their activities. I know like my nephew has different camps to get to, but they're like start at weird times in the morning or pickups are weird times in the day. And, my brother still has to work. And so it's like trying to coordinate all of that if there's a place for him to go. If he's home and my brother's trying to work from home, you can guess that's not easy for anybody that works that way, having kids around. We've got one guy in the office who's watching somebody's dog because their kid's at work. So the dog is at his house, but he can't work at home because the dog doesn't leave him alone. And so it's just sort of like snowballs about summers are
You,
different and you're off your schedule.
you know what, Renee? It's kind of funny because what you're talking about is funny. My wife and I were talking yesterday because I'm having to take my mom to the doctor a lot because she had a
Mm,
hip fall a few months ago,
yeah.
and she had two appointments this week, which meant two times I had to meet the van because she goes from she's in a rehab facility, so they take her to the clinic, but I meet her there and take her to the doctor. And Jennifer, I met her both days. And we're sitting there in the front of the clinic waiting for the van to come with my mom, and she's in her wheelchair. And we're seeing all the parents of the babies coming in for their
Right.
kid checks. I'm like, well, here we are, Jennifer. We've made it through that aspect of our life, and now here we are sitting with my mom because now we're taking her to the doctor every
Right.
day,
Yeah.
to every specialist under the sun, so she can get back home here in another couple of weeks, which is kind of exciting. But it happens all through the lifespan,
It
as
does.
we think about how to do those things and how we're managing. And certainly, you know how I get anxious about things and like I have to be doing stuff. Sitting for 2 hours waiting for a doctor who's an hour and a half late is not
Ooh.
something that goes well with me, especially when I'm in a little room. Not that I don't love my mom, I do, but there's, only so much quality time that you need to spend.
I imagine so. The other things about summer is it's like differences in work and workload. For me, this year at the office, they decided to do a little bit of a push on expectations. And so for all of us, we may have to do a little more work, do a little more votes, do a little more while you're trying to juggle people's vacations. And we don't have that many employees, and we have a minimum number we have to have a quorum to do the work itself. And so you have to be very specific about who has what days off. So then if somebody has a health issue or they're sick, it throws in a
Right.
curveball and you're constantly trying to juggle schedules to make sure the work still gets done. And in the summertime, because people normally schedule vacations as they should, and I want to promote them as I should, it's just more frustrating for those of us behind because we're filling in the gaps for those that are getting out and getting time off. So it's been a lot of just challenges of making work a little more complicated, and it's hard because as a leader I want people to take their time off, but man, is it hard sometimes behind that to get everything done while they're gone. So it's this balancing act of, and then you've got people who don't want to take the time because they need to be a team player and they need to stay, and then their mental health isn't in good shape and they really should have
Yeah.
taken the days off, and we've talked about that in a previous episode or two. So the summers are hard because you've got just lots of travel for folks and extra family at home. And I one gentleman, as an example, he sounds like he has two kids. One was one like more similar to one of yours. And he's like, I've got one and mom's going to be gone. And I need to make sure he gets to work this week. So is it okay if I work from home this
Yeah.
week to make sure he gets to where he needs to go? I'm like, that sounds like a familiar story I've heard before.
Yeah.
So I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he's like, but I just need to be there. He's a good kid, but sometimes, and I'm like, let me guess, it doesn't go through the alarms. And he goes, several alarms. So I'm like, I've heard this story before.
Yep.
Right. And so it's just harder because parents are trying to manage kids or aging parents. Just a lot going on.
Yeah, all of it, right? And then I think about the expectations, you kind of just alluded to that, the expectations we place on
Yeah.
ourselves, right? And so oftentimes that's the real barrier. When we talk about self-care, we should just call it self-expectations because
Mm,
when we don't manage our own self-expectations, then that's when things get out of whack. And I think that's difficult for most of us because we think about work when we're not at work. That's
mm,
not necessarily healthy. And so, that's a generational thing too. Younger generations don't think about work as much when they're not as work. They're better at setting those boundaries. But, I think about a lot about expectations and how do we better manage expectations of our employees or help guide our coworkers into how to do that differently, because that's what gets us in the end.
yeah. And I'm sure for you, I mean, you want you and Brent working in the business, right? There's up seasons, there's down seasons, there's is work going to come seasons? Am I going to have too much work to do, or how the heck am I going to get this all done? And you just are on a roller coaster, right? And so some seasons, and it's not necessarily
Right.
always summer, but this year with contracts and government and the end of the fiscal year being in June and the beginning of a new fiscal year in July, there can be a lot of extra stress for those of us that work with government contracts, government employees, because there's changes that happen in the middle of summer, which for a lot of other people, maybe their budget goes till Christmas. But for a lot of us, summers are a little more wonky. And so I'm waiting for training from a couple of national providers that I can't
Yeah.
get because their budgets have been frozen or are not moving the way they should. And so it impacts everybody when some of these changes are made.
Yeah, I
So
mean, and we're on the other end of that. When we think about the training and the stuff, we're waiting for budgets to be approved. And we've been holding out for some contracts for like 8 months now, like stuff
yeah,
that was everyone's agreed to it. We're waiting on a final contract, and then state money gets scooped and reallocated, and then there's a federal change, but we're still on track. And so that can be anxiety provoking, like, because you're always like waiting. What, is the work going to come along? At some point, I've got a family to feed, right? And so it's like, okay, but if all those contracts come through, then I'm too busy and I can't
right.
keep up, and then I won't be able to keep my head above water. And so it's just this always managing, kind of juggling a whole bunch of different things. And if you don't take good care of yourself and stay in the right mindset, that can be overwhelming.
That's right.
It can certainly just, kind of suck the life out of you, because you could just be stuck all of the time, not knowing what decisions to make or how to manage through. And so you really have to, in this line of business, you have to be okay with risk and managing that risk, but maintaining a clear head around what does that risk really look like and how do you manage it in a way that makes sense.
Yep. And so today we're going to talk next about some data about why to practice self-care and how does self-care manage to any of this, right? Because some people out there may be thinking, how does what you just said equal self-care? But it really is managing your own self expectations, as he said, but just your own
Mhm.
reactions to whatever's going on around us. And so I always think about the way I talk about just myself is I have so much capacity inside me to put up with whatever. And when it's full and I'm up to my neck in full of just a lot of things going on, I'm a lot shorter tempered to explode into however I'm going to react. That is normally not the best reaction, but it's a quick reaction, maybe a snippy email, a snippy response, a rude response to somebody. But if I've taken care of myself and lowered how I feel inside and lowered the pressure inside, then I have more capacity to take on whatever baloney comes my way on a given day. And so for me, self-care is really about how do I just prepare, not knowing how a day is going to be, or even knowing how a day is going to be. How do I get myself to a space where I have some room and some margin and some flexibility and some capacity to be able to manage it well? And when I don't, man, I hurt other people, I hurt myself, my health declines. And so that's what we're seeing here. So there's some mental health first aid. We're going to have tons of stuff for you today in the show notes. Mental health first aid, which Jason teaches often, a lot of places. But talk to us about some of that data that they've seen, because it's been proven, there's clinical data to show that actual self-care routines help. So what are we talking about here? And I'm sure you can probably add a lot more to this since you teach this all the time, but what are we talking
Yeah.
about with mental health first aid?
Well, when we think about the conversation we just had about managing our expectations, right? When we're taking care of ourselves and engaged in self-care activities, we're more self-confident. There's increases
Mhm.
of 64%, increased productivity by 67%. We're happier people. 71% of people reported that. And so, we also know from a physical health perspective, it reduces heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And so the upside to self-care and setting boundaries and setting limits around your time, taking time for yourself, going and working out, it's absolutely proven to have better outcomes, and it's going to help you to live longer. And you're going to be a healthier, more contributing member back to your local community.
Yeah. And I can tell you, it's not going to look the same in every season of life. There's some mornings, I can have goals to work out X number of days a week. But some mornings, right now, I'm waking up with these weird sinus headaches based on weather. And I don't know why I've got the combination going on, but I can't control the weather. And so, like this morning, as a great example, woke up and I just wasn't feeling quite right. So last night when I went to bed, I was like, should I rest in the morning or should I go to the gym? And I was going to go either way, depending how I woke up. And then I woke up and I was like, this is definitely not going to the gym. And
Mhm.
so it's one of those things, though, you kind of have to play it by ear. And I spoke to a dear friend a week or so ago, and she's having some health issues as she's aging. And she really doesn't like it because she was always very steady, very predictable, very health conscious, able to do all the activities. And now she's got some health issues where she feels like she needs to take naps more often and rest more often. And it drives her crazy because she was never, quote, that person. And so just
Right.
talking about how it's not the same in every season, and some seasons you need more. So we're going to talk about this because there's a lot of reasons why people may still be thinking this is stupid. I don't want to do self-care. I don't have time to do self-care. I can't do self-care. And there's a lot of barriers to that. So let's talk through the barriers, and then let's talk through like what you can do about it. So Jason, talk to me about a couple barriers and then flip it to the opposite of what we can do about those things.
Well, absolutely. Well, so time, time is also
Time.
an issue. I think about yesterday, my wife and I went out, we did some stuff and, got home later than we thought we were going to. And I looked out and it wasn't raining. And so, it was kind of supper time. I'm like, no, but I haven't run this week. So I had the discipline to say, I'm going to take 30 minutes and go to get a quick run in. And we're going to eat a half hour late because we've been trying to eat earlier because we go to bed so early. If we eat
Right.
too late, then it throws everything. You know how it gets when you get older.
I
You get
know.
all,
I know.
more and more rigid about your routine. But, I think we limit ourselves with our own time constraints. And so
Yeah.
we have to create time for those things, right? And right after time constraints is guilt on our
Oh,
list, right? Because,
yeah.
we can beat ourselves up and down with guilt that I should have done this, I coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? We shouldn't should on ourselves. We need to be thinking about how do we change that. And so to me, it's so much of it comes down to time, right? Like
Yeah.
how do we view time and how do we let some things slide sometimes that we normally wouldn't slide? Because that's healthy and good for us to do as well.
Yep. Another couple barriers that people always talk about, and we've got this linked for you in the show notes as well, is financial. A lot of people think that to take care of yourself, it's like spa days and, all of these extravagant vacations and things. And that's not really what it's about at all. For me, financial, yeah, there are some things I might want to treat myself to, but for me, I mean, we'll talk about this in my self-care policy in a minute, but just not working in the same location sometimes is all I need to be able to get a better perspective. And it doesn't cost me a penny. I just move myself from one location to another. And then other times, for workouts, right? I mean, Jason's the good example. He went out running. It doesn't cost him anything extra. It might cost him a good pair of shoes occasionally to make sure he's not hurting himself. But besides that, he didn't have to have a membership anywhere or special kinds of equipment or whatever. And so there's lots of options. So just when you get to those kind of ideas, if you're thinking, well, I don't have the finances to take care of myself, you might really want to think through what are some of the things that would make you feel better, and then how does that cost? I know for myself, I know I've mentioned this to you before, but I read fiction and I have figured out that fiction helps my brain disconnect because my stress is overthinking. And so reading nonsense fiction actually helps me de-stress, which is interesting. Well, I could buy every single fiction book or rent it every on Kindle, or I can take a little extra time and get it from the library. And that's what I've been doing. I use my library a lot
Right.
more now. And so I can have that same self-care without having to spend the dollars. And so it saved me a ton of
Yeah.
money. The other one on here is important. And for some of you that might be skeptics, it's really lack of awareness of why self-care is even useful. It sounds like that's not good for me or it's not helpful or it's not. We really need to dive into it because the research is bearing out that this is a really important thing to dive into. So if you're still pretty skeptical, you should really look into it more because taking care of you really helps as far as just your physical health, your mental health, and then you're a better person to help everybody else. So Jason, there's a couple more
And
barriers. What do we want to talk about?
I'd jump in before we move on. Let's just talk
Yeah.
about awareness. I think a big one is diet. I've
Oh,
been
yeah.
traveling a lot lately, and we've had to drive like 10-hour trips for some of the speaking stuff we've done. And we take time to stop and eat. Like, even when we're like, at some place till noon and a 10-hour drive to get back, avoiding gas station meals is really a key element of eating healthy, and although it may be delicious at the time, it's not good.
No.
It's just not good for you. And I'm not saying every restaurant meal I eat is good for me either, but taking some time and thinking about and having the awareness to be like, you know what, let's opt for something that's a little more healthier for this meal as opposed to, and I know I
Yeah.
drink too many mochas, but that there's certainly I'm aware of what I'm doing. It's not a lack of
Yeah.
awareness at all.
Yeah, I came home from work a day this week and didn't get a chance to eat as much as I normally would during the day because given how the day worked. And when I walked in the door, I was past the point of not feeling good because I had missed eating. I ate some, but clearly not enough. And so then I couldn't think straight. So I was like, I need to go to dinner like right now. And luckily my husband hadn't eaten. He hadn't eaten a big lunch either. So I was like, great, let's just go really early. So we're
Yeah.
like the old people at the out eating
Yeah.
dinner, but I had just waited too long. But I could tell, luckily, I'm aware and know that if I not took care of that pretty quickly, I was going to be in a different spot where I wasn't very happy and not feeling good. And so we took care of it. But you're right, diet's really important and just staying on top of it because you can't just forget to eat, don't eat, and then expect you to think clearly or to not react. I mean, those things go together with how you fuel your body. So, yeah. All right. So, there's another couple of barriers to chat about.
Yeah, so lack of support and overwhelm, that decision
Mm,
paralysis, right? We talk about
mm,
analysis paralysis a lot, and I like to kind of reframe those as, again, going back to unrealistic expectations. We put these
mhm,
unrealistic expectations on exercise, working out, or, we start diets that yo-yo
mm.
diets where we don't stick with them, or we start something for a couple of weeks and we don't see immediate results. And so then we just kind of start to forget that. I've done that a lot with vitamins over the years. Like I'm like, oh, I should take a vitamin, and then I'll do it every day for a month and then I'll forget. I'm like, well, that really doesn't help then, does it? So, we got to think about how do we create routines and keep these things with us and recognize that change is hard, right? It's easy
Yeah.
to change for a short term, but it's hard to sustain a change for the long term.
Yeah, I think I just saw for both of those topics. I think I just saw that supplements are like a year and a half of consistency before you see change. That's a long time to
Right.
see change. And then for
Yeah.
diet exercise, it's at least a month. So there's like, one of the
Right.
biggest keys that people see to why they're not losing weight, especially like when they're trying to use the medications and all the different things out there now to lose weight,
Mhm.
is because they jump too fast and don't make a solid 30 days on any given plan. So if you try something for a couple weeks and then flip and then flip and then flip, your body never figures out what you're trying to do, so it
Right.
doesn't follow along. And so in both cases, you're absolutely right. The decision fatigue, paralysis, whatever. I mean, one of my tricks, and I'll just share with you, is if I'm going to the gym in the next morning, I lay out everything the night before, because the first thing in the morning is the easiest time for my brain to be like, I could just go lay back down and get more sleep and not do whatever it is I need to do to take care of myself this morning. Very, very good at it. So if I repack everything at nighttime, including making sure I do supplements, but I put them in my work bag so that they go with me to the office. Because in case I don't have the time exactly in the morning, now they follow me to work and I can get them done. And so there's just some small tips that have helped me be a little more consistent in this space. And so if I have to wake up first thing in the morning and have no idea what I'm going to wear, it's I don't know what that's about, but all of a sudden I clearly can't make decisions that early. Probably no caffeine that more
Mhm.
early, but it's like
Yeah.
I have a whole closet full of stuff and nothing to wear. I'm like, what in the world? And that's not true at all. I have plenty of things to wear, but I just didn't think it through. So for me, that can help some of those things. And on the support idea, you got to be able to talk about it to your partner. Like Jason talked to his wife and say, hey, I would like to eat a little later so I can get this run in, right? So you have to be able to have the same understanding in the family. Or if he's okay to eat, if she needed to eat early and he's okay with heating it up when he gets back, we have those conversations too, because sometimes
Mhm.
I'm home and then Brent will feed me and he goes to the gym to do spin class or whatever. And so
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, do you want me to have it hot for you when you get back, or you just eat it the way it is? And he'll decide, and then I can help with that.
Mhm.
So, you have to have conversations about what's going to be supportive. And I think that's a really important piece. So before we
Absolutely.
go, we're going to talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week, and I'm just going to stress this. And this is for me, it's work from home, but for you, it's just working in a different venue. Sometimes you just need a different perspective, and maybe you don't have the time, energy, or effort to get out to do that self-care thing. You don't have the ability to maybe finance something, but you need a little change of perspective. Well, if you can get out, either sit outside. Right now, it's a little tad hot for that, but if you've got shade and it's not quite as humid on a day, you might sit outside. We've got like picnic tables around our office, just taking the time to get outside. But for me to work from home, or if you are a work from home person and you need to go to a place, the opposite to get a fresh view, that's what needs to happen. Because part of taking care of yourself is just getting a new perspective and making a change, and you'll see the world differently just sitting in a new spot. And so that's a very simple, free change that you can do. Sit somewhere else. And if you're in your office and you need to have lunch in your car just so you can think by yourself or listen to a podcast, do that. If you need to, go over to some place with air conditioning and sit there, do that. Go to the library, go to wherever. It just gives you a mental break, and take those breaks and make sure you take them, but make sure you move into a spot where you can get a different point of view, because I think it'll really be helpful. So, Jason, have you got any thoughts about that? Because you're traveling less right now, so you have a different view than you have had because you're in your own home for a minute.
I am. And so, it gives me opportunity to catch up on stuff at the farm, which again, I can get into analysis paralysis because the list is very long of different projects that, need to be finished or things to take care of. And so, it's really, rank ordering what needs to be done and then still catching up on email and doing work in the morning. But also kind of, I'm not a fisherman, but this is the time of year a lot of people go fishing. And, I think as we think about self-care and sometimes we think about meditation or how do we do those things? Well, for a lot of people, it's just going and literally sitting on the edge of the dock and
Yeah.
just sitting with that pole, right? And so when we talk about self-care, I think sometimes people don't connect with it because they're like, I don't do that self-care stuff. And we need to recognize that self-care looks differently for all of us. And so as we kind of, end today's episode, I think really thinking that self-care, we got to get outside of the box. And maybe we shouldn't be calling it self-care anymore, but it's about what are those things that we can do that are just good for us. And whether it's fishing or biking or running or whatever your thing is, we need to do more of that this summer.
I think maybe I just had an epiphany. Maybe I should go sit and pretend like I'm fishing and just look at water because I know that actually calms me down
Yep.
looking at water. I can throw something in to make it look like I catch a fish, but not ever have to touch a fish.
Yeah.
So
There you
that could be
go.
a really good idea. Well,
Absolutely.
so today we talked about just how summer could be challenging for lots of people, whether you have extra kids at home, you have things going on. I mean, you never know what's happening in the world. And so lots to do. So thinking about how do we take care of ourselves in that when there's like maybe you're waiting for things or there's expectations, how do you manage those expectations? Share with you some data, working through the mental health first aid, talking about like why this is good for you. You may not like the name of it, but it's still really helpful to think about how do I take care of myself in stressful times. Before we go, just want to remind you that you too can follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. If you leave us a positive review, we'll send you a prize. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.